Hey solo gamers, thanks for checking out How's It Play Solo. I'm Mac Kern, and today I'm taking a look at the Castles of Burgundy, the card game, which is a card-based re-implementation of the popular Castles of Burgundy board game. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over the differences between the two games, but one of the biggest things that the card game offers over the board game is a dedicated solo mode. So I'm going to take a look at that today. First, I'm going to go over the general rules of the game for the multiplayer version, and then I'm going to take a look at the additional rules for the solo game. Let's check it out. The Castles of Burgundy card game is played over 5 rounds. You have rounds A through E, and these round cards help you keep track of the current round. At the beginning of the game and in every round afterwards, you set up cards in the display. The number of cards that are placed in the display corresponds to the number of players. So this is set up for a 2-player game. You put one card in each of the 6 rows, and then you draw a 7th card, and that 7th card gets placed whatever the die on that card is, it gets placed in that row. So I'm going to place that in row 2. Every round lasts for 6 turns, and so you deal each player 6 cards. These are the same cards that make up the cards in the display, and one of these cards will be played by each player for each turn in the round. There are 3 parts to each player's playing area. You have a project area, you have an estate, and then you also have a storage area. Also at the beginning of the game, you deal out, each player gets 1 silver, 1 randomly dealt animal, a randomly dealt good, and then you deal out these worker cards based on player turn order. The goal of the game is to accumulate as many victory points as possible, and you can do that by building up your estate. You can sell goods for points and money, you can collect a variety of animals, and you can also trade in workers and money for points. On the first turn of a round, each player draws 2 cards out of the 6 that were dealt to them that round, and then starting with the first player, that player chooses 1 card to play and take an action. And so the only thing that matters on these cards is the number on the die. So most, or at least about half of the actions you can perform are based on the number of this die. So there are 6 different actions you can perform when you discard a card, and I'm going to go through each of those. One of the things that you can do is, if you discard a card, you can take a card from the corresponding row in the display. So if I discard this card with a 1 on it, I can take a card from the 1 row in the display, and that card goes to my project area. Now the project area can never store more than 3 cards. If I have 3 cards here and I want to add something else, I just have to discard something that's here. So that's one of the actions you can do, is take a card from the display and put it in your project area. You can also take a card from your project area. If I had a die with a number 6 on it, I could discard that and move this number 6 card from my project area to my estate. Different types of cards have different effects when you place them in your estate. I'm going to go over that later. Another thing you can do as your action for the turn is selling goods. So you start the game with 1 good. There's 3 different types of goods in 3 different colors. So you can acquire more goods over the course of the game. Let's say, for this example, that I had acquired another good of the same color as the first one I had. If I have a die with a 3 or a 4 on it, when I discard that die, I can sell all of the goods of the corresponding type. So the way that this works is, when you sell goods, you keep them set aside because they're worth 1 point per good sold. You also get paid 1 silver per good that you sell, and when you sell goods, if you're in a multiplayer game, you get the first player marker, and in the next round, you get to go first. I will go ahead and interrupt the action explanation for a second to talk about silver, because you get silver by selling goods. There's a couple other ways to get it, but In addition to the action that you get from discarding a card, you can, during your turn, spend 3 silver to draw the top 3 cards from this deck. And so you draw 3 cards, and you can look at those cards, and you have 2 options. You can take one of those cards and place it in your project area, if it's something that you'd like to build in your estate, or you can discard one of those cards to take an action based on the number on the card that you're discarding. And then the other 2 cards just get placed in the discard pile as well. Another thing you can do as your action when you discard a card, regardless of the number on that card, is you can restock your workers up to 2. So I mentioned that these workers get dealt out at the beginning of the game. Basically, if you have 1, you get another 1, so that you're up to 2. If you don't have any, you get 2, so that your stock is 2. It doesn't do you any good to discard for workers if you already have 2. But these workers are important because you can play them when you discard a card to change the number on it. So if I play this card with a 4 on it, but I want it to be a 3, I can discard this worker to treat this card like a 3 instead. If I had multiple workers, I could discard 2 of them to turn this 4 into a 2 or into a 6. I can actually turn a 6 into a 1 with this, and a 1 into a 6 as well. So the workers are good because they allow you to kind of mitigate the luck of the draw with the dice on these cards. Another thing that you can do is you can just discard the card from your hand to gain 1 silver and place it in your storage. I already talked about what silver can be used for. And finally, the last thing that you can do as an action on your turn is when you discard a card, regardless of the number on the die, you can convert workers and silver into points. And so you discard a die, you also return as many workers and silver to the supply as you want. You divide that number by 3, and that's how many victory point cards you take. So if I discard 2 silver and 1 worker, that's going to give me 1 point. So those are the 6 things you can do when you discard that card for your turn. Once you take 1 action, and then also if you wanted to spend silver to draw from the deck, that's the end of your turn. It passes to the next player in turn order. So once every player has taken a turn, everyone should still have 1 card in their hand. They draw the next card from their 6 that they were dealt at the beginning of the round, and then in player order, you again choose a card to discard and take an action with. Once everyone has taken actions for each of the 6 cards that were dealt to them at the beginning of the round, you discard any cards that are left in the display, and then you restock the display according to the rules for the player count you're playing with. Also, you adjust the round card to the next round, and you also have to deal each player 6 new cards to use for actions in the upcoming round. There are 7 different types of cards that can be placed in your estate, and each one has a different effect when you place that card in your estate. So the ships allow you to take 1 good, and I already talked about goods and how you can sell them for points and for money, but there's 2 different piles of goods. When you place a ship in your estate, you can choose a good from either of those piles. These pasture tiles with the animals on them, or the pasture cards rather, they work similar, but they allow you to take an animal of your choice. And so animals, there are 4 different types, and just like with the goods, they're in 2 different draw piles. But animals are worth points at the end of the game. So there are chickens and there are cows, there are pigs and there are sheep. If you have a set of all 4 of those, that's worth 4 points. If you have 3 of the 4, that's worth 2 points, etc. And you're not limited to collecting 1 set of those. So for example, if I have 2 cows, 2 pigs, 2 chickens, and 1 sheep, I score 4 points for having a full set of each animal, and then I still get the 2 points for the set of 3 on the other one as well. So you can get a lot of points by collecting a lot of animals, and the pasture cards allow you to do that. The knowledge cards allow you to take 2 workers. And unlike when you discard a card to restock your workers, you're not limited to maxing out at 2. You always get 2 workers when you put one of these in your estate. Mines give you 2 silver cards. Buildings have a wide variety of effects, so they're pretty unique in that they don't all do the same thing. This one, for example, allows you to take a pasture card or a ship card from the display and put it in your project area. But some of them allow you to take other types of cards from the display and put them in your project area. Some buildings allow you to take cards from your project area and put them into your estate. They all let you do things more efficiently, but they don't all have the same effect. These dark green castle cards let you perform one action as if you had discarded a die of any number of your choice. So if I put this in my estate, I can act like I had discarded a card with any number that I want to perform any of the 6 actions that you're allowed to perform when you discard a card. And the purple cards, Cloisters, don't have any effect when you place them in your estate, but they're important because they can gain you a lot of points, and they can also be used as wild cards when you're completing triplets, which I'm about to talk about. If you have a card in your estate and you play another card of that type, you keep them together. And when you play a third card of that type, you've completed a triplet. And at that point, the cards are worth the value listed. So 3 ships is worth 4 points. Now, if you're the first person to complete the ship triplet, you get a corresponding bonus card. So there's one of these for each of the 7 types of cards. Also, anytime you complete a triplet, whether you're the first person to complete a triplet of that type or not, you get a bonus based on the current round. So if I'm in round B and I complete a triplet, I can take, as a reward, I can take 2 animals of my choice, or I could take 2 goods of my choice, or I could take 3 workers or 3 silver. And these benefits decrease over the course of the game. Once I have a full set of any color, I can still play more cards of that color, and I can start a new triplet. So if I've got 3 ships and I play a 4th ship, I'm going to start a new pile of ship cards, and then if I get 3 in addition to the pile that I already have, that's going to be worth another 4 points at the end of the game. Different types of cards have different values for triplets, and I think that directly corresponds to how powerful the cards are. So these dark green castles are pretty powerful. They do you a lot of good when you're placing them in your estate, but triplets are only worth 2 points. Buildings are a little bit less flexible, but they're still pretty powerful. Those are worth 3 points for a triplet. And that brings me to the Cloisters, which, as I mentioned before, don't have any effect when you place them into your estate. But these can be used as wild cards when you're completing triplets. You can also just use them as Cloisters. So if I complete a triplet of just 3 Cloisters, that's going to be worth 6 points at the end of the game. But let's say that towards the end of the game, I have 2 of these knowledge cards, and I'm having a hard time getting a third one. I can place a Cloister into my estate, and I can just put it, when I place it, I can put it with my knowledge cards, and it becomes a knowledge card for the purposes of completing this triplet. So it always goes in the back, and it always is going to be worth the number of points on whatever card I'm placing it with. There's a lot of flexibility that comes with the Cloister. Once you place a card in your estate, you can't move it, but let's say that I have 1 Cloister in my estate, and I play a building. I'm allowed to place that building on top of the Cloister, and then that Cloister becomes a building for the purposes of completing a triplet. Or I could even have 2 Cloisters placed on top of each other, and when I place something else in my estate, I can play it with the Cloisters, and I complete a triplet. So you have a little bit of flexibility there. You also get a bonus when you have all 7 types of cards represented in your estate, and there's one of these bonuses for every player. Number of players that you're playing with determines which of these you use. So in a 2-player game, the first person to complete this all 7 card bonus gets 3 points, whereas the second player to do so would receive 1 point for that. At the end of the game, your points are the total of all of your triplets, and then you get points for your animals, You get points for the goods that you've sold. If you've accumulated any victory point cards from converting workers and silver to points, then you add those to your score as well. Also in the multiplayer game, having the first player token at the end of the game is worth 1 point. For the solo game, you set things up like you were playing a 2-player game, and when you take your turns, you take them all in a row uninterrupted. So each round, you're taking 6 turns following the normal rules of the game. But in addition to that, you set up 5 piles of cards for an automated player. The first pile has 3 cards, and then each pile after that adds 1 more card. So you've got 4, 5, 6, and 7. And at the beginning of each round, you take one of these piles of cards and add the cards in that pile to the dummy player's estate. So the dummy player works on building triplets, and the only thing you have to worry about is points for completed triplets, and then also the dummy player gets bonus cards. So it can get bonus cards if it's the first one to complete a triplet of a certain type, or if it's the first one to play 7 different types of cards, it would get that corresponding bonus as well. At the end of each round, you total up how many points the dummy player has, and then you also total up how many points you have, including any points from animals and sold goods, etc. If you have less points than the dummy player, you automatically lose the game. But if you have a tied amount or more points than the dummy player, you deal out the next pile of cards to the dummy player's estate, and then you continue playing, and you win by having more points than the dummy player at the end of the game. One final thing I should mention about the dummy player is that it always plays cloisters as their own pile, so it's never going to use these as a wild card to complete other triplets. And because these can be pretty powerful for the dummy player, anytime the dummy player places a cloister in its estate, you get 1 victory point card to offset that advantage. It might seem like there are a lot of rules for this game, but I've found that it's pretty easy to learn, and I think that most players will get the hang of it before even the end of their first full play. I think that 2 of the biggest strengths of the solo variant are that it's very quick and the dummy player is very easy to manage. On the flip side, I don't think that the dummy player is a very interesting contribution to the game. Theoretically, it should influence the decisions that you make over the course of the game, and there are times when that could be the case. For example, if the dummy player is getting close to having all 7 types of cards in its estate, that could influence you to kind of diversify the cards that you add to your own estate to try to claim that bonus first. Or if the dummy player racks up a lot of points early in the game, it could force you to pursue short-term points rather than long-term strategy. But in general, I've found that the dummy player doesn't influence my decisions as much as I would like for it to. And also, one of the big things that's missing from the solo game as opposed to the multiplayer game is there's absolutely no competition for the cards in the display, which is a pretty big part of the game, in my opinion. Having said all that, I don't think that the Castles of Burgundy card game is a bad game by any means. I think that it could definitely appeal to players of the original Castles of Burgundy who don't mind a much lighter, condensed version of that game in solo form. It's definitely a very tactical game, and the amount of luck involved in the card draw, both for cards that make their way to the dummy player's estate and for the cards that are placed in the display, that amount of luck might be a turnoff to some. But in general, I've found the game to be pretty relaxing. The decisions aren't very engaging, but they are still somewhat interesting, and I don't know that I'll keep coming back to the game. I'm not sure how much replayability is there, but for the price, I'm pretty happy. I don't love the game, but I do like it pretty well, and if you're interested in the game, I do recommend checking it out.